According to the UN Children's Fund, in 2010, a report showed that 13% of the children living in Zimbabwe suffer from child labor. Zimbabwe's Labor Act has a law that prohibits employers from hiring a person that is under 18 years old to do a hazardous work. But sadly, these laws are poorly enforced by the inspectors, which have no special training or resources to address the issue. A study said that poverty is the main reason of children being employed at very young ages, also HIV and AIDS. This causes families to break. UNICEF is the association in charge of taking actions for the United Nations. The government of Zimbabwe and UNICEF made a minimal advancement in efforts to eliminate child labor. They passed the Trafficking in Person Act that criminalizes trafficking offenses that are related to child labor and child pornography. This has helped, but it still needs a lot of attention and help. Children that are 7 years old work 8 or more hours per day in the artisanal and small-scale mines in Katanga, the province of the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to a study made by PACT, young children first enter to the mines to take care of their small siblings while their mother are working, and after they finish up sorting and washing minerals or selling goods to the other workers from the mine. PACT has been working to fight child labor in Congo since 2011. They have been participating in a mechanism called ITSCI that is designed to ensure the origins of minerals are traceable and compliant with international laws. The government followed the UN Backup Action Plan that ends the recruitment and use of child soldiers, working groups sexual violence and child recruitment, and arresting several individuals on charges of recruiting and using child for labor or as soldiers. However, child labor continues to be a big issue in Congo, including in domestic work, forced mining. The government has failed to convict any individual of child labor violations, and the penalties previously set are not being applied. There are some social programs to assist child laborers, and laws and regulations mandating free primary education are not enforced. In Sudan, child slave labor and slave labor of women has been a problem since the 17th century until now. The last 15 years, this problem has been increasing thanks to the civil wars between the Muslim and African tribes. The African children that live in the country are being kidnapped by Arabs, and they are being used in the Arabian slave trade by the government's militia. There are different organizations and government groups that have uncovered slave rates in Sudan, and they are making their best efforts to stop it, but with no avail. In 2014, Sudan was a complicit in the forced recruitment of children for armed conflicts. Not Soldiers campaign was created to raise awareness about the protection these kids need and to penalize the people that recruit these children.
Women in Botswana constitute 52% of the country's population, and within this population there are social differences. To begin with, Botswana is a patriarchal society characterized by cultural norms, beliefs, and practices that maintain gender inequalities. These beliefs have also led to parents thinking that female children don't need education since they will soon get married and then be taken care of by their husbands. The status of women in Botswana is affected by the dual legal system, under which customary law is applied alongside common law. While reforms have been made to remove discriminatory provisions under the common law, there are still discriminatory practices under customary law. Botswana has become a supporting member of a number of treaties, including the Beijing Declaration, Platform for Action, Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Millennium Development Goals, and more. The government of Botswana is doing a big effort on achieving gender equality, but despite this, the strong societal perceptions keep doing it impossible for men and women to be equal. But this doesn't mean it's totally bad. There are many good things, like for example, according to the UNDP, Botswana is ranked 49th of about 150 countries on its gender empowerment measures, and also you can find women in all sectors of society where they are a part of leadership and decision-making positions. Besides the government, women-centered NGO initiatives include rights training, gender awareness and sensitization, as well as lobbying and advocacy for policy and legal reforms. Organizations like Imam Basadi and SADC have conducted political empowerment programs for women who are in politics. Such programs focus, among other things, on public speaking skills, campaign strategies, leadership skills, etc. The Women's Affairs Department occasionally provides funds to women from various sectors to attend courses and seminars on leadership skills. But although the government and its partners have made progress in the area of gender equality, there remain challenges to overcome. The government of Rwanda has a lot of commitment to change things in gender inequality, and it has made great progress. They have a target of women comprising 40% of decision-making decisions in 2020. Rwanda was also the first country in the world to have more than 50% female members of parliament. Rwanda is the only country in the world where more women than men serve as elected officials. Rwanda is one of the African countries that has made greater things to improve the gender inequality situation, like for example the participation of women in policy making. But despite these achievements, many challenges of inequality remain. In Rwanda, as estimated, 41% of businesses are run by women. Although both men and women entrepreneurs face similar constraints in a number of areas, women experience additional gender-based challenges in operating their income-generating activities. Women in Rwanda are key players in economic and social development. However, lack of gender statistics in employment, wages, land ownership, access to financial and non-financial service delivery, and other areas is a key problem. Rwanda's Women Network is a national humanitarian non-governmental organization dedicated to promotion and improvement of the socioeconomic welfare of women in Rwanda. Over time, the organization has dedicated its efforts to strategies that empower women. To date, RWN works with various local and international partners. Since 1997, there has been a Ministry of Women in place, but in the face of limited legal protection for women, its effectiveness in promoting women's rights has been constrained. Article 2 of the Constitution of Mali establishes equality between women and men and prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender. Mali ratified the Protocol of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa in 2005. The country also ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 1985 and the Optional Protocol on Violence Against Women in 2000. Many of both women and men reported witnessing violence by a man against their mother during their childhood. In almost all families, men are the ones that make all the decisions, although in certain types of household decisions, women have a greater but limited voice. The status and social roles of women in Mali have been formed by a variety of traditions in ethnic communities. The rise and fall of the Great Saharan states, French colonial rule, independence, urbanization, and post-colonial conflict and progress, forming just less than half Mali's population. Malian women have always been crucial to the economic and social structure of this largely rural agricultural society. There is a gender inequality situation due to a number of constraints and difficulties before and after recruitment into the public administration. According to the Permanent Household Survey, women's labor force participation rate in Mali is relatively high. The survey also shows that 51% of jobs are held by women, as against 49% for men. However, of these 51%, only 3.6% earn salaries or wages, and the others are self employed. There are many things currently being done to improve the situation, and one of them is that UN Women set up a wide-ranging peace and security program to support women that were affected with the conflict that happened in Mali, with a budget of nearly 2 million US dollars for the period to 2012 to 2017. It is run in cooperation with the Malian government through several agencies, including the Ministry of the Promotion of Women, Children and Families, and three other ministries. The program focuses on protecting women and girls in conflict zones, preventing gender-based violence, and building the agency of women as key actors in peace and recovery efforts.
Malawi is one of the poorest countries in Africa. In 2004, a study was made, and more than half of the population lives in extreme poverty and gain less than $1 a day. The poverty in this country is increasing due to the fact that people stop spending money and distributing aid because of the corruption that has Malawi. The country is also getting poorer because they are unable to pay for imports. Because of this, in a study that was made in 2009, the investment is falling by 23%. Malawi is located in the southeast of Africa, next to Zambia, Mozambique, and Tanzania. The country depends a lot on agriculture, and the population is highly vulnerable to the effects of natural disasters. The country has suffered a lot of dry spells and flooding. In 2015, it happened a flooding that affected almost 1 million people in the south. This usually rises because between December and March, and the people have trouble in buying food because it's more expensive due to the natural problems. According to a recent study of cost of hunger in Africa, in Malawi, 10.3% of GDP is lowering because of child undernutrition and because of child mortality due to the same. Democratic Republic of Congo. Democratic Republic of Congo became the poorest country in the world in 2010. This began since the Second Congo War, which was in 1998. This caused a crisis in the country and 5.4 million people died. Congo is in West Central Africa, near to the Sudan, Uranga, and Rwanda. The Democratic Republic of Congo is a country that is rich on oil and has a lot of young population. Income in Democratic Republic of Congo is unequally distributed, and more than half of the population lives in extreme poverty. This economy depends greatly on the oil and the lack of diversification. The country has a lot of position in the market, but lacks of importance and competitiveness because of the lack of infrastructure, limited access to advanced technology, and the climate they have in the habitat and the poverty. Congo has a lot of natural resources, which include minerals hard to find in another country, and they have really good soil for agriculture. But the problem is that near the Democratic Republic of Congo, there have been a lot of conflicts involving bombs, grenades, etc. This causes infrastructure destroyed and makes market access more difficult for the country. The past few years, countries like Brazil, South Africa, and Malaysia has invested in the country's agriculture. Madagascar. The industry of this country depends a lot on tourism and agriculture. The tourism has lowered 50% compared to 2008. 73% of the population in Madagascar lives in extreme poverty. 43% of the children, fewer than 5 years old, suffer extreme undernutrition. Madagascar is near to the Indian Ocean of the Southeast Africa, next to Mozambique. Madagascar is the fourth largest island. Madagascar has a lot of flora and fauna, which doesn't exist nowhere else on Earth, but Madagascar is really vulnerable to natural disasters, most commonly affected by cyclones, flooding, and drought. Because of the natural disaster, this causes a major threat on their food. The lack of food does not only rely on natural disasters. Deforestation and poor land management also affects it. 80% of the rainforest on the island has been cut because of the use of the wood and other agriculture practices. The World Food Programme is from the UN and is the largest agency fighting hunger worldwide. The WTP has helped Malawi, and the objective is to strengthen countries' capacity to improve education, reduce malnutrition among children and vulnerable cases, and help the food security of communities living in a high risk of disaster areas. Help them by supplying food, construct barriers to prevent big disasters. The WTP wants Once this through in three components: nutrition, education support, management of disasters, and market support. In Democratic Republic of Congo, there were trained main operations: assistance to refugees, not only from there but also from people to Central African Republic. They made a school meal program for children in schools in insecure places, and an urban safety net program in Brasilia and Point North children who don't go to school, pregnant women, and people with sexual diseases who need supplements. Madagascar also had help. In 2015, WFP helped 680,000 vulnerable people in the country's southern and southeast regions, and the poorest area, which are in the urban areas.
Terrorism. The terrorism attacks have increased all over Africa in the past years because there are so many different groups working for different causes, mostly since ISIS work started spreading around the world. Because this gives them an example about how to expand and make more people know about their cause or beliefs, not only in the country but frontiers and sometimes around the world. In Africa, there is a lot of terrorism based on their conditions, not only geographical because they are completely connected to the ocean, so they can have a lot of trafficking or weapons, drugs, and more, and because they are practically at the center of all the continents, but their current economy doesn't help either. Africa is in a really bad economy place right now, and because of this, many people take the wrong decision to join these terrorist groups with the hope of making more money and really fast, believing that the perfect life that they're promised in the beginning is actually going to happen, and the situation doesn't affect terrorism only, but because of this, we can see the rise in child labor as it is explained above. The terrorism exists all over Africa, but on the next paragraphs, I'm going to focus on three main countries and explain what is happening, how, and why. Kenya. The terrorism in Kenya is not news. This problem has been there a lot of time, and as a consequence, it has caused many deaths, like in 1998, when two bombs were thrown outside the US embassies in many cities in Africa, including Kenya. Other retaliations of the terrorism is 9/11, which brings us back to Africa because when it happened, it was known that Kenya was an indigenous infrastructure due to the fact that it was an Al Qaeda base, and that made it one of the closest bases to America. There are a lot of examples of efforts and approaches that many countries, but mostly the US, are doing because they want Kenya to be free, just like the goal they had in Operation Iraqi Freedom. But because of the tension that these two countries have, thanks to the extremist decisions that the US has done to achieve peace, not only the people living in the country and don't help at all with the terrorism. An example includes lowering tourism or trade because of the disrupt of international air trafficking, causing bigger debates of whether they should pair up with Washington or not. This has caused a lot of awakening in Kenya about whether or not they should be trusting the US, but they are doing it because that is really their best option right now, because it is as simple as depending on the trade with the US and getting money from it, or depending on the terrorists but get the worst working conditions and still don't have money to survive or safety for their families. Nigeria. Just like in Kenya, the United States is trying to interfere with this problem by making harsh decisions without it even being part of the country. It is known that the US is mainly in Africa because one of their main goals is to take down the Al Qaeda infrastructure, which is in this case, is affecting Nigeria the most because they are one of the US oil suppliers with 7% of the United States oil. This situation is affecting their economy too, by dropping two-thirds of Nigeria's GDP just in the past 20 years, causing a big gap in the income disparity, causing the two main groups in Nigeria, which are radical Muslims in the north and tribal groups in the east, to have problems because of these injustices that they are being threatened with. Because of Nigeria's democratic institutions regained in 1999, the new leader, Olusegun Obasanjo, who cleared the government from as much corruption as he could, and this caused the Northerners to feel threatened because the majority of authority figures that were clear were Muslims or Northerners, which caused attacks and more things that we consider terrorism. But it all came from the same country. It doesn't always have to be from ISIS or Al Qaeda terrorism. It can be from different groups with different backgrounds too. Sudan. The fear in Sudan, just like in other countries, is big, but here there is a bigger risk of oppression because the terrorist group Boko Haram wants to have all the power, not only economical and social, but political, by being the rulers. Many people are supporting this because they say that Boko Haram is simply following the Islamic rules, but in truth, they are extremists in all sense of the word. They have been cases when they sentence people to death because of wanting to go to school or getting pregnant, and they're not even on power yet, so they don't have the minimum authority to do that. We can clearly see the trouble that Sudan is in thanks to this group, and the scary part is that we know that there are more groups and more bad politicians that let themselves be led by religion and extremist ideas, but at the end of the day, don't care about the well-being of the citizens or anyone in particular but themselves. Sudan is facing a really big challenge right now because of that danger of Boko Haram taking power. But this country is not the only one we should be concerned about, but all of them. Terrorism is a worldwide problem. It doesn't only happen in Kenya, Sudan, or Nigeria, but in Africa, and that spreads to the world. Even if we think that the changes or problems that these countries or complete continent have won't affect us, we are totally wrong. Why? Because the whole world is connected through treaties, trade alliances, and if one starts to decrease economically or socially, we can all end up the same.
Drug trafficking in Guinea. The UN Office on Drugs and Crimes sounded the first alarm on the crisis, has warned an exploding cocaine trade in West Africa. According to a UN ODC report from 2008 World Drug Report, the majority of air carriers come from Guinea, Mali, Nigeria, and Senegal. Guinea was the embarkation point for 221 carriers detected since 2006, the single largest national total in the region. The same report states that today cocaine is being smuggled through every African country. For nearly a decade, Guinea-Bissau has regularly been referred to as Africa's first narco-state. The country has been called a drug trafficker's dream and a drug hub, where huge quantities of cocaine from Latin America arrive to Africa and are later smuggled through Europe by boat or commercial flights, mainly destined for France, the United Kingdom, and Spain, where the drug sells for almost US $2 billion on the streets. At least 50 tons of cocaine arrive to Africa each year. Profits from these drugs flow have fueled the corruption of state institutions and officials, as well as coup d'etat, violence, security, and health problems and instability. Guinea has made very little effort to address its drug trafficking and use issues. That's why there is very little reliable data on the scale of the problems. Guinea is now generally believed to be the major drug trafficking hub in West Africa. Drug trafficking in Nigeria. Between 2005 and 2007, a series of more than 20 major seizures were made in the West African region, involving thousands of kilograms of cocaine. Most of the seizures were made at sea, but some involved aircraft or land transportation. Some of the seizures were made after long, exhausting investigations, and some others were stumbled upon by accident. At the same time, hundreds of commercial air carriers were detected carrying cocaine on flights from West Africa to Europe. There were indicators of high-level involvement in the drug trade in a number of countries in West Africa, including Nigeria. West African involvement in transnational drug markets extends back at least as far as the 1970s. The West African sub-region played no major role than being an air location and a place to launder the big profits. Later, in the mid-2000s, the region became a cocaine transshipment zone. Cocaine profits started to increase and traffickers started to look for new income and distribution streams. That was when evidence of large-scale production in West Africa emerged. Another main factor is the fact that methamphetamine has many advantages over plant-based drugs, not the least of which are low startup costs and the ability to engage in production anywhere. If the drug seized had made it to Europe, the retail value will have exceeded the GDP of some of the nations it transited, suggesting criminal organizations with greater resources at their disposals than the affected states. Drug trafficking in Mali. Mali should adopt the recommendations made by a 2014 report by the West Africa Commission on Drugs, not just for transit, drugs, the state, and society in West Africa, which emphasize discriminalizing some degree of drug use and possession for personal use. International counter-narcotics efforts in Mali have tended to focus on the involvement of terrorist and extremist networks in the country's drug trafficking activities. Yet the extent and exact nature of this involvement is open to dispute. Most West African traffickers tend to prefer maritime transportation of drugs. Still, Mali serves more as an additional pathway rather than a primary transit zone. Drugs are moved into the country by road from countries like Guinea and then transported through the desert towards Europe to be later distributed. Malian government and UN officials within the country are scared by the premise that jihadists may be controlling the drug trade and consequently making millions of dollars. However, on June 2014, the UN Secretary General's report noted, and I quote, that UNODC has mobilized 30 million to support capacity building in the region, to enhance the accessibility, efficiency, and accountability of criminal justice systems, as means for combating organized crime, illicit trafficking, terrorism, and corruption. Mali's laws relating to controlled substances date back to 1926. In 1995, Mali ratified the 1961 UN Convention on Narcotic Drugs, becoming one of the first countries in West Africa to do so. Finally, in April 2010, Mali created the OCS, designated it with responsibility for drug law enforcement. As in other West African countries, cannabis remains the most widely used illicit substance in Mali. Some suggest, however, that the consumption of amphetamine-type substances and crack cocaine has been growing in recent years, reflecting the general problem of transit countries inevitably becoming consumers.
Horrific abuses in the north by the militant Islamist group Boko Haram and the Nigerian security forces heavy-handed response to this violence dominated Nigeria's human rights landscape in 2013. The 4-year insurgency by Boko Haram, which seeks to impose a harsh form of Sharia or Islamic law in northern Nigeria and end government corruption, has killed more than 5,000 people, although the Nigerian government set up a committee to develop an amnesty framework for Boko Haram. The group continued to target government security agents, churches, and mosques. Since 2012, Boko Haram has burned more than 300 schools in the north and kidnapped more than 10,000 children of education. Widespread lead poisoning from artisanal coal mining in Zamfara state has killed at least 400 children since 2010. The release of funds in February by the federal government to clean up the environment allowed lead treatment programs to be expanded to reach an additional 1,500 children. Sharia penal codes in many northern states criminalize consensual homosexual conduct with caning, imprisonment, or death by stoning. Same-sex marriages or civil unions, which could lead to imprisonment above 14 years, are so broadly defined in the bill that they include virtually any form of same-sex cohabitation. In addition, the bill seeks to impose prison sentences on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people. Human rights groups vocally oppose the bill because it, it will formalize discrimination against people and have horrible effects on constitutionally guaranteed rights to dignity, personal liberty, freedom of speech, association, and assembly, and freedoms of thoughts, conscience, and religion. In Egypt, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt has presided over the flagrant abuse of human rights, violence by groups, and the government has escalated. The al-Sisi government is acting as though to restore stability. Egypt needs a dose of repression the likes of which it hasn't seen for decades, but its treatment is killing the patient, said Joe Stork. The problem is that Western countries are set to repeat their mistakes of subordinated human rights. No member of the security forces has been held accountable for the mass killings of protesters that followed the military's July 2013 removal of Mohammed, Egypt's first freely elected president, which al-Sisi orchestrated as defense minister. This included the killing at least 9,000 people in a single day, August 14, during security operations to clear protest sites in Cairo. The violence is spreading the country, and the human rights are being abused by the authorities. In the last days, this conflict got down, talking of aggression within the people of the country. The government and the authorities aren't in favor of treating people the way they deserve, so they refuse help from others to avoid treating without violence. Human rights in Sudan are working with a special law to end up with people that are against human rights. The law is named International Humanitarian Law. In Sudan, violence means people can't discriminate other people, give equal rights to women, and many other things that involve physical and verbal hurt.